Most people think clarity comes from adding more information, more conversations, more opinions, more podcasts during the commute, more scrolling before bed, more input, somehow leading to better understanding. But some of the most important realizations in human life arrive the moment all of that disappears. Not when the mind becomes busier, when it becomes quiet. And that challenges one of our deepest assumptions about modern life. Because we live as if constant connection keeps us sharp. In reality, constant connection often keeps us occupied. There is a difference. Watch what happens when people are left alone without their usual distractions. No notifications, no conversations filling every gap, no endless stream of updates. At first, many experience discomfort. The silence feels loud. Thoughts that were previously buried begin resurfacing. Unfinished decisions, lingering emotions, questions that never had room to fully form. Most people interpret this as a problem. But here's the strange part. The discomfort is often evidence that something important is finally reaching the surface. The mind becomes audible when the noise leaves. And that is why strategic withdrawal has existed across cultures for centuries. Not as an escape from reality, but as a return to it. Because once external noise fades, another psychological process begins. The human brain was never designed to operate under uninterrupted stimulation. Yet many people spend entire days moving from messages to videos to conversations to work tasks without a single moment of genuine mental stillness. The result is a curious illusion. You feel mentally active while becoming psychologically reactive. Instead of generating thoughts, you process thoughts. Instead of choosing attention, you surrender it. Except reality behaves differently when stimulation stops. Brain activity doesn't simply shut down during solitude. In many ways, it reorganizes itself. Disconnected experiences begin connecting. Emotions sort themselves into patterns. Questions that seemed confusing suddenly reveal their structure. That sudden realization during a shower, that answer that appears during a quiet walk, that unexpected insight while staring out a window. Those moments are not accidents. They are often the brain finally catching up with itself. And once the mind begins reconnecting scattered pieces, something even more interesting emerges. Creativity. People often imagine great ideas arriving during intense effort. Sitting at a desk, staring at a screen, forcing solutions into existence. Sometimes that works, but many breakthroughs appear somewhere else entirely. While driving alone, walking without headphones, sitting quietly after everyone else has gone home. That sounds intelligent until you look closer, because creativity is rarely the product of constant focus. It is often the result of temporary distance. When the mind stops chasing answers, hidden connections become visible. Ideas that seemed unrelated suddenly fit together. Contradictions resolve themselves. New possibilities emerge. The solution often appears when the search pauses. This explains why periods of isolation have accompanied artists, scientists, writers, and innovators throughout history. Not because solitude creates genius, because it creates the conditions where ideas can meet each other. But this creates another problem. Most people do not merely use constant stimulation. They build their identities around it. Much of daily life becomes a mirror reflecting other people's expectations. Colleagues react to us. Friends respond to us. Social media reflects versions of us. Gradually, an uncomfortable question emerges. Which parts are actually ours? and which parts are performances we have repeated for so long that they feel real. This is where solitude becomes more than a thinking tool. It becomes a reset mechanism. When external feedback temporarily disappears, many social identities lose their grip. Certain ambitions suddenly feel unnecessary. Certain fears shrink. Certain desires become clearer. People often discover that what they thought they wanted was heavily influenced by the environments surrounding them. The distance changes the picture. Not because they became someone new, because they finally encountered the person hidden beneath constant interaction. And perhaps that is the deepest paradox of all. We treat disappearing as absence, a withdrawal from life, a retreat from the world. But psychologically, the opposite is often true. The person who never steps away risks becoming shaped entirely by whatever happens to be closest. The person who disappears for a while gains something far more valuable: a reference point, because solitude is not the absence of influence. It is the rare moment when influence loosens its grip enough for you to recognize which thoughts are actually your own. Most people think inner peace is a feeling, a pleasant emotion, a calm afternoon, a stress-free life, something that arrives when problems disappear. But that assumption creates one of the biggest misunderstandings in modern psychology. Because comfort and peace are not the same thing. Comfort depends on circumstances. Peace survives them. A comfortable person feels good because nothing is threatening their stability. A peaceful person remains stable even when something does. That distinction becomes obvious the moment life stops cooperating. A delayed flight, an unexpected bill, a difficult conversation, a sudden disappointment. Comfort often collapses under pressure. Peace does not. But here's the strange part. Many people spend years chasing comfort while believing they are pursuing peace. They avoid difficult conversations, avoid uncertainty, avoid emotional discomfort, avoid anything that might disturb their equilibrium. The strategy feels logical: reduce discomfort, increase peace. Except reality behaves differently. Every avoided challenge quietly teaches the mind the same lesson: you are not strong enough to face this. And eventually, the world becomes psychologically smaller. The more life you avoid, the more dangerous life appears. That is why genuine peace is not built through protection. It is built through trust. Trust that discomfort can be experienced without becoming destruction. And once that distinction becomes clear, another misunderstanding begins to unravel. Many people secretly associate tranquility with weakness. They imagine peaceful individuals as passive, detached, unambitious, removed from the intensity of life. Popular culture often reinforces this image. The calm person is portrayed as someone standing outside the battle, observing instead of participating. But real psychological tranquility looks very different. Because peace is not the absence of engagement. It is engagement without unnecessary chaos. Think about the people who remain composed during emergencies. The leader who stays clear while everyone else panics. The parent who remains steady during a family crisis. The friend who can listen without becoming overwhelmed. Those people are not escaping reality. They are interacting with reality more effectively than everyone else. That sounds intelligent until you look closer. Because most people confuse emotional intensity with strength. They assume that feeling more means caring more. Reacting faster means understanding more. Becoming overwhelmed means taking something seriously. But often the opposite is true. The calmest mind frequently sees the situation most clearly. Peace is not withdrawal from the storm. It is clarity inside it. And that realization leads to a deeper question. If peace is neither comfort nor escape, where does it actually come from? The answer surprises many people. It comes from building a place that circumstances cannot easily enter. Not a physical location, an internal one. Every person carries a psychological environment inside their mind. For some, that environment is unstable. A compliment creates confidence. A criticism destroys it. A success creates worth. A failure erases it. Their internal weather changes with every external event. But over time, some people develop something different. A mental sanctuary. A place where thoughts can be observed without immediately being believed. Where emotions can be experienced without becoming commands. Where temporary events are recognized as temporary. This inner space is rarely built during easy periods. It is usually built during difficult ones. Moments of uncertainty, loss, failure, disappointment. Experiences that force a person to discover stability beneath changing conditions. And once that stability begins forming, a final paradox emerges. Many people desperately want relaxation, yet the moment they encounter it, they become uncomfortable. Watch what happens when someone finally has nothing to do. No deadlines, no notifications, no obligations. Within minutes, many reach for their phone, turn on a screen, find a task, create stimulation. Anything except remaining still. Why? Because true rest requires something many people have never practiced. Being alone with themselves. The exhausted mind often assumes relaxation means stopping activity. But exhaustion is not always physical. Sometimes it is psychological momentum. The mind has become so accustomed to movement that stillness feels unnatural. Silence begins revealing thoughts that busyness was hiding. Unresolved worries, unanswered questions, emotions waiting for attention, and suddenly rest no longer feels relaxing. It feels exposing. But this creates another unexpected truth. The difficulty of relaxing is often evidence of why relaxation is needed. Because rest is not merely recovery from activity. It is recovery from avoidance. The moment a person can sit quietly without needing distraction, entertainment, or escape, something profound has changed. They are no longer using noise to protect themselves from their own minds. And perhaps that is what inner peace was never meant to be. Not a permanent feeling, not a perfect mood, not a life free from conflict, but the rare ability to remain at home within yourself, even when the world outside keeps changing its address. Most people believe they are making their own choices, their own opinions, their own decisions, their own identities. But watch carefully what happens when they enter a room full of disapproval. A new idea suddenly remains unspoken. A personal preference gets quietly adjusted. A strong opinion becomes softer. A genuine reaction gets replaced by a safer one. And often, it happens so automatically that they barely notice. Because one of the most powerful forces in human behavior is not logic. It is acceptance. The desire to belong has shaped human survival for thousands of years. Being rejected once carried real consequences. Isolation could mean danger. Exclusion could mean vulnerability. The brain remembers this ancient lesson remarkably well. Even today, a raised eyebrow can trigger discomfort. A critical comment can linger for hours. A stranger's opinion online can influence an entire day. But here's the strange part. Most people think they are afraid of rejection. In reality, they are often afraid of self-definition. Because the moment you stop asking permission to be yourself, something uncomfortable happens. You become responsible for your own identity. No committee approves it. No audience confirms it. No group guarantees that everyone will agree. And that freedom can feel surprisingly heavy. The approval of others often protects us from the responsibility of knowing ourselves. That is why many people spend years unconsciously negotiating with the world. They trade small pieces of authenticity for small doses of acceptance. Nothing dramatic, just tiny adjustments, a softened opinion here, a hidden interest there, a personality edited to fit the environment. The changes seem harmless until one day they create a deeper problem. Because if approval shapes identity, then approval also begins shaping emotion. Notice how easily another person's behavior can alter someone's internal state. A compliment creates confidence. A delayed text creates anxiety. A criticism creates self-doubt. A sign of approval creates relief. The emotional system starts behaving like a remote-controlled device. Someone else presses a button. The mood changes. Someone else withdraws attention. The emotional climate shifts again. Most people assume this is normal, and to some extent, it is. Humans are social creatures. We influence one another constantly. Except reality behaves differently when influence becomes dependence. The problem is not that other people affect your emotions. The problem is when they determine them. When your peace depends on their response. When your confidence depends on their approval. When your worth depends on their recognition. Suddenly, your emotional life no longer belongs entirely to you. It has been outsourced. And outsourcing something as important as self-worth creates an impossible situation. Because other people are inconsistent. They are distracted, busy, confused, focused on their own problems. Sometimes they praise you. Sometimes they forget to. Sometimes they misunderstand you completely. If your value depends on those reactions, your identity becomes permanently unstable. An unstable source can never create stable self-worth. This becomes especially visible in the pursuit of validation. Many people imagine validation as a reward, a pleasant bonus, something extra. But psychologically, validation can become a form of fuel. The person posts something online and waits. The employee seeks constant recognition. The friend searches for reassurance. The achiever collects accomplishments but never feels finished. For a moment, praise works. Confidence rises. Relief appears. The emotional hunger quiets. But only temporarily. Because validation behaves differently than genuine self-respect. Validation must be continuously supplied. Self-respect generates itself. That sounds intelligent until you look closer. Because the pursuit of praise often disguises itself as ambition. People believe they are chasing excellence. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they are chasing permission to feel valuable. And no amount of external approval can permanently solve an internal question. The applause fades. The achievement becomes normal. The compliment loses its effect. The hunger returns. Not because there is something wrong with the person, because validation was never designed to perform that job, which leads to a final transformation. What does emotional independence actually look like? Many people imagine becoming emotionally independent means not caring about anyone, not needing support, not being affected by relationships. A cold, detached version of strength. But this creates another misunderstanding. Healthy emotional independence is not isolation. It is ownership. You appreciate praise without requiring it. You value relationships without becoming defined by them. You welcome love without making it your only source of worth. You listen to criticism without surrendering your identity. The opinions of others remain information. They no longer become instructions. And perhaps that is the deepest shift of all. Emotionally dependent people constantly ask the world a silent question. Tell me who I am. Emotionally self-sufficient people ask a different one. Does this reflect who I already know myself to be? The difference sounds small, but it changes everything. Because freedom begins the moment your sense of self stops living in other people's minds and finally returns to your own. Most people assume freedom means having more choices, more opportunities, more options, more paths available at every moment. But watch what happens when someone is given unlimited possibilities. They often become more confused, not less, more anxious, not more liberated. Because the deepest form of freedom has very little to do with options. It has to do with authority. Who gets the final vote inside your mind? That question quietly shapes nearly every human life. Many people appear independent on the surface. They make their own money, live on their own, make their own decisions, yet psychologically, they remain governed by external approval. The crowd still serves as judge. Social expectations still serve as law. Public opinion still acts as a compass. And so they spend years consulting invisible audiences before making important choices. Should I wear this? Should I say this? Should I want this? Should I become this? But here's the strange part. The more authorities you consult, the harder it becomes to hear yourself. Because every borrowed opinion adds another layer of noise. Eventually, people become experts at reading the room while forgetting how to read their own minds. The strongest authority is the one that remains when nobody is watching. That is why self-sovereignty begins with a difficult shift. You stop treating your value as a verdict delivered by others, and start treating it as a responsibility defined by yourself. Not arrogance, not stubbornness, not believing you are always right. Something far more demanding. The willingness to decide what matters before the world tells you what should matter. And once that process begins, another obstacle appears almost immediately. Fear. Not fear of failure. Not fear of uncertainty. The fear of authenticity. Because living according to your true beliefs sounds inspiring in theory. In reality, it creates friction. A person discovers what they genuinely value, then realizes some friends may not understand it, some family members may question it, some colleagues may disapprove of it. Suddenly, authenticity stops feeling romantic. It starts feeling expensive. That sounds intelligent until you look closer. Because many people are not avoiding authenticity due to confusion. They are avoiding the consequences of clarity. Once you know what you truly believe, pretending becomes harder. Once you recognize what genuinely matters to you, compromises become more visible. Once you see your own truth, ignoring it requires effort. And that effort carries a hidden psychological cost. Every person has experienced it. The uneasy feeling after saying yes when you meant no. The discomfort of remaining silent when something important should have been said. The strange exhaustion that follows living against your own convictions. Most people dismiss these moments as stress, but often something deeper is happening. They are experiencing the consequences of self-betrayal, because every ignored truth leaves a small psychological residue, a quiet tension, a subtle loss of self-respect, a growing distance between who you are and how you live. At first, the gap seems insignificant, a small compromise, a minor adjustment, a harmless accommodation, but repetition changes everything. Each act of self-betrayal teaches the mind a dangerous lesson. your inner voice cannot be trusted. Eventually, confidence begins eroding from within, not because the person lacks ability, but because they have repeatedly abandoned their own judgment. The fastest way to lose yourself is to keep negotiating against yourself. And this is where self-sovereignty becomes more than a philosophical idea. It becomes a practical necessity, because every life is guided by something. If not principles, then pressure. If not conviction, then convenience. If not personal truth, then social momentum. Most people never consciously choose their direction. They absorb it from trends, from expectations, from comparison, from whatever appears normal in their environment. Except reality behaves differently for those who develop internal principles. Their decisions become simpler, not easier, simpler, because every choice passes through a filter. Does this align with what I believe? Does this support the person I am becoming? Does this violate something important? The answers do not remove difficulty. They remove confusion, and confusion is often more exhausting than difficulty itself. Over time, a life guided by conviction develops a different quality. There is less performance, less imitation, less dependence on shifting opinions. The external world continues changing. Trends evolve, expectations move, crowds change their minds, but something inside remains anchored. Not rigid, not closed-minded, simply rooted. And perhaps that is what self-sovereignty ultimately means. Not controlling the world, not controlling other people, not forcing reality to obey your wishes, but refusing to hand over ownership of your conscience. Because the most powerful form of independence is not the freedom to do whatever you want. It is the ability to remain loyal to what you know is true, even when the world offers rewards for becoming someone else. And perhaps the greatest freedom is not controlling the world around you, but no longer being controlled by everything within it. If this episode gave you a new perspective on human behavior, thank you for spending this time with us. And if you're not already subscribed, be sure to subscribe to Relaxing Facts Studio for more deep psychological documentaries like this one. Please like this video, share it across your social media pages, and help these ideas reach more people. Most importantly, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and the insights you took away. Your support is what keeps this channel growing, creating, and continuing this journey together.